around the time when I start using memes or start catching on to them is when they've already been overused, and I'm basically like those corporations where it's like, it's done. Nobody says demure anymore, and I'm like,
wait, but I just want one chance to use it.
exactly. Hello, everybody. My name is Keegan.
I am Keely.
And welcome to History from Horseback. So today we're doing something a little bit different. We're going to be doing a pretty casual equine current events episode.
We'll catch up on the news. Very fun, very light, very laid back.
Very demure.
Yes, I nearly said that, but I was like, now that there's a trademark thing going on about it, maybe I shouldn't.
We have both brought some topics to talk about. I've brought two, and Keely has brought at least one. And we'll see where it goes from there because it might bring up some more fun topics. So you heard about the whole Przewalski horses rescue stuff, right?
Yes, there's 3 of them, right? And 2 of them.
I think 2 confirmed.
Yeah, and they're Fiona and Shrek, right? That's their names.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So for anyone who is unfamiliar, I think it's around June that this kind of first surfaced, or June 2024, so earlier this summer, where basically 2 separate people or kind of groups came across Przewalski's horses at 2 different auctions, which is very odd because this is a highly endangered species of horse. And they're not, they are a wild species. They have not been domesticated, so they're definitely not commonly found. And they're also, as an endangered species, they're protected under the Endangered Species Act, and they are very closely monitored usually. Their bloodlines are very closely monitored because there were not a lot of individuals left at a certain point. And so they're very carefully bred in order to try and prevent them from just being decimated by genetic bottlenecking.
Now, I heard that apparently 4 of them had escaped earlier in the year from like a zoo or some breeding program, and they assumed or thought that these were part of the missing ones from the zoo. Did that turn out to be true, or?
So from what I know, from what I was able to find, the confirmed stuff, and this was from like August that I found kind of the latest, most reputable news source. They still aren't 100% sure where they came from. There were some Przewalski's horses that they went missing. So it was unclear whether that means they escaped or could have even been stolen, potentially.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it was a private zoo. So, especially as I live in Texas now, and it's actually pretty wild what kind of animals you can just own on a private property, like the exotic animals that people just have. It's crazy. And so I'm not super surprised that someone could have just had someone very rich could have had some Przewalski's horses in like a private kind of zoo collection. But anyway, yes, some disappeared. So these guys, the 2 individuals that are confirmed Przewalski's horses, they both surfaced in around June. He was for sale in February. So this is Shrek. So our first Przewalski, which is he's a male, he's a stud or a stallion. Unfixed stallion. She saw him for sale at an auction in Kansas, and her name was Hannah Huckabee. So she immediately bid on him and got him and brought him back. And they were selling him as a mule that was from a donkey and a fjord.
Yeah, I mean, if you were gonna think he was anything else, that is what you'd guess. And I think a lot of people did, to begin with, think that they were hinnies or they were like, there's no way that this is Przewalski's.
Yeah.
But I do remember seeing early clips of them when they first got Shrek home and he was just in a pen on his own, and they were like, he's really wild and feral and we don't want to go anywhere near him. because he's really dangerous.
Yeah,
and I
they
was like,
could not
that
handle him.
makes me think he's a Przewalski. Like, that makes me think that he's dead set, like, wild, and that's why they can't, handle him at all.
Yes, exactly. He did arrive kind of like emaciated because he was very stressed. And the problem was that they couldn't handle him because he was very wild. They didn't like being in a pen. He didn't like being near humans. And at this point in August, they said that he still doesn't like being around people, but he will accept treats from a bucket. So if you if you're near him and you toss a treat in a bucket, he'll come over and get the treat. He just doesn't like eating out of people's hands.
That's fair.
Yeah, and at this point, he is now with some other equines and in a nice kind of larger paddock. They just had him in that kind of more quarantined area temporarily.
Yeah.
And so when they saw him, they were immediately suspicious. They posted a TikTok video, which ended up kind of going viral or like exploding, at least in the equine world. And everybody was like, there are some people who are like, no, that can't be one. There are people who are like, oh, he definitely looks like one. Lots of people wondering how that happened. And so they did send hair samples in for genetic testing, and he came back as having Przewalski horse DNA.
Can you imagine being the person who did the DNA test? Can you imagine being the lab person and being like, no.
Literally, that is a statement in this article where the person who did the testing said that they couldn't believe where it was coming from. They're like, if this was coming from a zoo, totally would not have been crazy, but how is this happening? Yeah.
Oh boy.
Yep, exactly. And so at around the same time, there was a rescue that's located in Utah that had a horse surrendered to them from an owner who had bought that horse from an auction. And this was a mare, and she immediately failed like training boot camp. Which is totally believable considering this is a wild horse. Yeah, so this was just someone who would, get horses from auction or wanted to get, a nice horse from auction. They thought, again, that she was some sort of mule. They sent her to get trained, and she was much too wild, so she was sent back. So this owner gave her to this rescue in Utah, and when the rescue got her, they went, oh, she looks like a Przewalski's horse. And so they also sent in DNA. They sent in hair samples, and they also got back Przewalski's horse DNA. One thing to note about that test is that it can detect that there is that DNA in the horse, but it can't tell if it's 100% pure or not. So there is the slight chance that these are not purebreds. But at this point, they suspect that they are pure Przewalski's horses that were the ones that disappeared from this private zoo. So far, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife has not confirmed whether or not they are investigating. I imagine they are. I think they are definitely... They can't not be investigating this. And that's actually something that I'm very interested in, because it's like, okay, how did this happen? How did these extremely endangered animals end up in auctions where if they hadn't been bought by these people, they could have been sent to kill pens and actually slaughtered, which would have been really unfortunate for their species as a whole.
Yeah, I can only imagine that if they were lost too or stolen at some point, and they either didn't want to let it get out because people would have been on the look for them, and they probably would have just gotten lost further and further into the system. Yeah, I mean, it would be devastating, especially because there's not that many of them left.
Yeah.
And I know that there's not that many of them left in the United States, whereas, out in Mongolia, they're a fair bit more. I mean, they still have a wild population over there. Only because of conservation efforts and whatnot.
Yes, exactly. That is due to reintroduction.
Yeah, 100%. But yeah, it would be really, really important to do that investigating to try and find out what happened and how they slipped through the cracks so viciously, because how do they end up at an auction, a random auction in the middle of nowhere because someone decided they don't want them anymore?
Exactly.
tell me you, if you were a sort of person that frequented auctions, tell me right now that if you had seen that horse at an auction, you wouldn't have just placed a bid because why not? Because that's a Przewalski's horse, and
Yeah,
it's just
yeah,
like, how could you not? If I had the money to throw around, absolutely, I'd be doing that.
yeah.
Like,
And
if only to be able to get it to a place where you could be like, this needs to be in either a zoo or some sort of conservation program, not going through a pipeline auction in the middle of like background Utah or whatever. Like,
mhm.
no way.
And that's exactly kind of what both of these people that now own these Przewalski's horses, that's their stance. Just been trying to give the horses the best life that they can live right now
Mhm.
until some decisions are made about where they can go next, whether they're going
Yeah.
to end up at some zoos or in some other kind of like conservation program.
Yeah,
Um,
obviously Shrek's pretty valuable too because
he
he's a
is.
stud, and if he's really pure as a stud, then obviously he's really really valuable to any program.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other one, they named her Fiona. After so the first one, the stallion, he was named Shrek, and these people who had him, they hadn't really posted anything online until they saw this rescue in Utah talking about Fiona, this other Przewalski horse, who was unnamed at the time. And so the Huckabays, who had Shrek, they messaged them, got into contact with them immediately. We're like, hey, this also happened to us. And so then the rescue named their Przewalski Fiona, since the other one was named
Because of
Shrek.
course, yeah.
Yeah,
Because how could you not?
yeah, which was kind of sweet. And I want you to guess how much money the original person who purchased Fiona at the auction, how much money they paid for her.
I don't want to overshoot and I don't want to undershoot, but I have a feeling it's going to be like a criminally low amount for this horse. I'm going to say $5,000.
$35.
That's insane. They really did not want that horse. They said, "Please get this thing away from me."
I mean, if you look at the footage of her, she looked really rough. I think
Uh,
they were like, as far as just like, no one could handle her, so no one could groom her. So she just
yeah.
looked rough like that. Like she had her like, winter
30
coat on that was like sloughing off. Um, and there,
$35. Like at that point, you just buy the person a coffee and be done with it. Like
I know.
that's insane.
Oh my god, I know, it's crazy. I was like, you're kidding me. Because Shrek was at least purchased for $1,375. Which actually, if I didn't know that he was a Przewalski's horse, if he was just some mule that was unhandleable, don't know if I would pay that much. But they
Mm,
definitely knew he was a Przewalski,
yeah.
the purchasers, the buyers. And so they were willing to pay a lot more for him. But that is the $35 just astounded me.
It's just that's insane.
I keep thinking this is like if like a tiger was for sale at like a cat show or something. Or like a red wolf at a dog show.
Yeah. And it's just like, how do you get that far? How do they get all the way to an auction like that without being recognized or having someone pull them aside and be like, hey, that's a wild animal. I can pay you X amount of money and take them off your hands and make sure they get back to, a zoo or a conservationist program or something where they're going to be safe.
Yeah. And now the question is like, so, could this have been some bigger thing? Like, did someone potentially steal these Przewalski's horses and then something went wrong?
Mm,
Like, maybe they were harder to handle than they expected. So they were like,
yeah.
okay, we just need to get them off of our hands instead of like maybe their original plan. Maybe they escaped and then some people who thought they're, being good Samaritans found
Yeah.
them, tried to send them somewhere. But yeah, yeah, it's just very, very odd situation.
Yeah, I can only like something like that would never happen in Australia. So, I mean, it's just crazy to
this
me.
this is also, yeah, I'm like, this is something that could only happen in like some of these states where people where it's not as highly regulated of what kind of animals you can keep.
Yeah. Yeah,
I
no, not at all.
I literally went to a reptile expo the other day, and they were selling exotic cats. Not like big cats, but like
Like servals or caracals or something?
yeah.
Wow.
Um
That's absurd.
and some you're going to love this, some sugar gliders.
Oh god. And to be fair, the sugar gliders could come from a wild population in Southeast Asia because they do live there as well. But it's very obvious if they're the Australian ones because they look very, very different in their patterns and colours and
I
stuff
didn't
like
even
that.
I didn't even see them because they were in their little pouch.
Yeah, yeah, I bet they were. That's what they do.
I was like,
Uh,
ooh, I don't know how I feel about this. I didn't know there were gonna be mammals here.
yeah, yeah. I know it's not like equine related, but there was a guy in who was part of like the herping sort of reptile industry, like was a massive owner of a bunch of venomous species. He was well known for being around venomous, like keeping groups on Facebook. And he was really well known for making videos of him free handling his venomous reptiles.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and he made a video of free handling his baby inland taipan. Most venomous snake in the world, by the way.
Yeah.
There is a
Yeah.
reason that they don't have a high kill count in Australia, and that's because you'd never see them. You see coastal taipans way more than you ever see inland taipans, and even then, it's still very, very rare. And he was bitten by his inland taipan.
Yep.
He ended up in the hospital, and it's really funny as well because someone had gone onto a post talking about an update on him, and they'd taken a screenshot of him making a comment on Facebook that just said "anti-venom is for pussies," and
Hmm.
so, and there was a lot of people saying, oh, no one should be wishing death on anyone. Like, it makes no sense. And it's just like, well, we're not wishing death on anyone. But I mean,
Maybe
if you
some
would,
repercussions for your actions.
yeah, if you'd like to, if you'd like to go around and, find out, you're going to. Like, and yeah, it's kind of tragic because the last update I heard about him was that his kidneys just weren't producing urine. He'd
Oh
gotten the anti-venom
no.
eventually, but they weren't sure if it was maybe too late because he was in multiple organ failure, and his kidneys just won't produce. He's stabilized, but his kidneys just will not produce urine. And so he's having a lot of difficulties. And it's like, well, I mean, you free-handled an inland taipan. I don't really know what you expected.
There's definitely this crowd within like the reptile community, especially with like venomous, with like hots, and that's
Yeah,
this idea of like it's this macho like kind of toxic masculine like community of
yeah,
like, oh, look at how tough I am, like and
yeah,
how brave I am. I'm not afraid of this animal. When it's like, okay, like I understand, like I don't want people to be as fearful of these animals. I think they're very misunderstood. But I also think that they deserve a certain amount of respect, especially
yeah,
when they're
100%.
venomous. Like you can't be complacent. You can't get this complacency. And even like, there I spoke with this one man who had a ton of experience with all of these different exotics, or sorry, venomous snakes and reptiles at the expo, and he was saying how he's like, yep, complacency is basically the biggest killer when it comes to venomous animals. Um,
Yeah, and it's really funny too because people had been posting, like, this guy was known for talking about the fact that that toxic masculinity of, if you don't have the guts to handle your hot snakes, then you shouldn't like free hand them, then you shouldn't own them, and blah 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 and all this stuff. And people
that's
had been
stupid.
taking screenshots of him writing these things and posting them on the post of him being very, very ill in the hospital, which is just like a very sick sort of satisfaction of like watching people you know get that. But the really sad thing that came out of all of this is that guy had a collection of like some 14 venomous snakes, and all of them were euthanized because
Really? Oh,
yeah,
that
his
is
entire
sad.
collection was two gaboon vipers, like a fertilance,
Mm.
like a bunch of different things. His name was Jeffrey Leibowitz, by the way.
Yeah.
A death adder, 2 black forest cobras, and the same inland taipan that bit him. Yeah, like they euthanized his entire collection because they didn't have anything to do with them, and like rehoming them would take forever, and it puts a really big dampener on like all the people in different states that are trying to fight for the right to own these species safely.
Yeah.
I will openly admit that I'm the sort of person that's like, if you're not a professional or you don't own the snake for a professional reason, like venomous snakes really shouldn't be hobby pets, not unless you live in a place where, or you have access to your own anti-venoms, like, or you own them for some reason, for like farming, like milking venom or whatever.
Yeah.
If you don't, you just should not own them. Like, I'm very much the opinion of that sort of thing, especially with like all the venomous species in Australia. I think out of the top 10 deadliest or most venomous in the world, I think we have like 6 of them. But like you just don't see them because no one screws around with them because they know that they're so deadly, and it's really sad to sort of see these people who fight for the right to keep these animals safely and professionally and, you know, correctly get, you know, dragged by someone like this who just really ruined it for everyone else. And really sad that his entire collection and all these innocent animals were, you know, destroyed because of their owner's, you know, foolish mistake.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the only thing that I've really been paying attention to this week is the September Keeneland sales for thoroughbreds. They put, there was a lot, about 154, I think, give or take, sold at the sale. I believe the top selling colt was an Uncle Mo. So they've posted all of the like results on the PDF that they always publish, which includes like the buyers and the sellers that have made the most at the races. It is so insane to me how many of these horses are just by the same stallions. Like, I want to know how many of these horses, like how many of these colts were out of like I'm scrolling and all I can see is Curlin into Mischief, Uncle Mo, Gunrunner, Tappet, Warfront. That's it. Like, they're all the same. They're all the same. There was a one here that sold
Oh my god,
a Gunrunner colt.
So many of them are just the same. Wow.
Yeah, a Gunrunner colt that sold for 2.2 million. He's very pretty. He's a grey. It looks like he's a grey.
That's crazy.
Looks like he's greying out anyway, but $2.2 million on a yearling. Would you spend $2.2 million on a yearling if you could afford it?
Depends on how nice they are. If I could afford it is the big question.
To be fair, I really don't actually follow this all that much. I just hear what comes out of it. Something that I've really enjoyed following in the last few days is there is a TikTok creator named X Rider.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and she's great. Like, she's wonderful. She was one of the very early starters of Foal Watch, and I have followed her for a number of years now. But something really cool she's been doing this week is she's been doing videos of a comparison of when she first met the foals as they were born, and she's like got a video of like booping them on the nose or like just interacting with them as a literal newborn as they've just come into the world, and then like 2 seconds later it cuts to the very same horse going through the ring at the Keeneland sales. And in the comments she usually puts her thoughts about what they expected to get for the horse, what they did get for the horse, like who bought them, if it's been publicly announced, and just a bit of background on, like, you know, I was watching one the other day and she mentioned the fact that it was a filly that they at first they expected her to go from anywhere from 100 to 150, but once her x-rays came through, they dropped their expectations down to about 75,000. And then it ended up being that she sold for just over 140 or 150,000. So she kind of blew through their expectations. But it's really fun to watch her put on such a great sort of comparison, or like such a great sort of like storytelling little thing. Like, and it doesn't take long. Like, the videos are not long themselves. They don't really show much of the auctions, and they don't really show much of the horse when it was a foal. They're very, very short. But it is really, it's such a cool way of showing, you know, that they do follow along with what happens, and, you know, that her specifically, she's very, very invested in where her babies go, and what happens to them, and following along with them and stuff, which I think is very cute. Also, it's really funny to see what they look like as foals, and how they've grown up, and what they become, you know, as yearlings, and how they look as yearlings, and how like specific sires can be very, very obvious, and what they pass down to their foals, and you know, other things. But yeah, no, it's been very, very fun to watch X Rider's journey, watching her babies go through the Keeneland ring. I'm really not that invested in the thoroughbred world, to be honest, but I did think it was fun to sort of go through and see the absolute ridiculous prices that some of them sell for. And the fact that most of them are from the same stallions. And it's really funny to see the same stallions sell their progeny around the same, like, price levels too, like, depending on, and like, you can see, like, based on what the stud fee for the horse is, like, how much they've either made or lost on the foal. It's very funny. But yeah, no, really cool.
For someone who's not very invested, you sure do know a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I say not very invested because I think if I ever met these people or got into like a situation where I was talking to people about it, I would really have no idea what I was talking about compared to them. But outside of that, I mean, I do follow a few accounts. You know, I follow Spendthrift Farms account, I follow Keeneland, and I follow X Rider's stuff, and I follow a few of her friends too that also deal in thoroughbreds. The thing that I really do love about X Rider too is that she sort of shows a lot of her process when it comes to training, like retraining off track thoroughbreds. One of the videos that she posted with one of the yearlings that went through the sale, she wrote in the comment, I always thought she'd make a good eventer, if anything. So she's like, well, she didn't sell well as a racehorse, but I think she'll make a good eventer, which is very funny.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm like, that's fair. I mean, she might not be, they're not all racers. Like, not all of them are cut out to do what they were born to do, but that's okay because they all find jobs in other places, and some of them are very good. I mean, I know Boyd Martin has a thoroughbred, an off-track thoroughbred at the moment that he's training for eventing named Remy. And he's been doing a really awesome series of getting Remy used to things like water jumps, and, you know, skinnies, and going through jumps that like look strange, like going over coffins and ditches and stuff that are really jarring and can be quite difficult for a horse to get their head around. But he's been doing really great, which is awesome to see. And Boyd is such a character too. Like, he's so funny to watch. Actually devastating to me that he rides for the United States now instead of Australia, but fair enough. Definitely gained one there. He's very funny, very good at what he does.
Sorry.
We'll let it slide this time. That's fair. Got to give you the one up somehow.
My next topic is talking about a study, and I've kind of brought it up a couple of times, so you might know what I'm talking about. It's a study that came out last month, I believe, in August. Yes. It's just published back in August. The study itself is called Whoa, No Go, Evidence Consistent with Model-Based Strategy Use in Horses During an Inhibitory Task, by Evans et al., and it is published in the Journal of Applied Animal Behavior Science. So to put that into some English.
Some layman terms for the people who need it.
Yeah,
I have my hand raised.
Yeah, it's like in those movies where like the scientist says something and everybody's like, say that in English, please.
Yeah.
Basically, the scientists they kind of trained these horses in a certain way that they were testing to see whether the horses are capable of planning and thinking ahead.
Yes.
in order to do something, in order to complete a task. And so I've read the study, and I've also read, like, there's an article in The Guardian about this study. And I gotta say, as someone with, like, a science background who, like, was taught how to read scientific papers and that kind of thing, I feel like the Guardian article, I'm sorry, it's not the best. It's
They never usually are.
it's misleading. The study itself I found pretty sound, but the Guardian was kind of inventing claims that the scientists weren't actually, like, making in their study.
Okay, very interesting decision on their part.
Yeah, they just seem to extrapolate a bit.
That's wild.
In the study itself, what the scientists basically did, I'll briefly explain the study. They were using positive reinforcement in order to teach the horses a simple task. This task was to touch a target with their nose, and they would receive a reward for that. So this is kind of like a basic skill. It's something I've taught Ace. He knows how to target my palm. If I stretch it out and I say target, he knows how to target certain objects like cones, where he'll go and he'll touch his nose to it. It's very cute.
I can only imagine.
Yeah. But so they used positive reinforcement, aka they're associating this behavior that he completes with a reward, and in this case, it was a reward. It was a treat. So they have that first session where they train them to do this. The next session that they had was where they introduced something they called, like, an inhibitory task. And so what that basically means is they almost made, like, a stop sign, or in this case, it was a light, so a stop light. When the light is on, the horses will not receive a treat for touching their nose to the target. They will receive a treat for touching their nose on the target if the light is not on. So they introduced this in the session. And understandably, the horses didn't seem to understand it.
Yeah.
They were just touching the target no matter what, whether the light was on or not. And they did this for the set amount of time. And then what they did was basically offer what was negative punishment. And so negative punishment doesn't, like, we think of punishment as kind of like a bad word, I think, because we're thinking
Yeah,
of,
I think
like,
a lot of people assume.
we're thinking of them like someone hitting an animal. When it comes to training, punishment literally just means that you're trying to decrease a behavior. And so, like, the reinforcement, you're trying to reinforce the behavior, you're trying to get more of it. Positive, you're giving something to them. So you're giving, like, food. When we think of punishment, negative punishment in this case means you want them to do it less, and you're taking something away. That's what the negative means. So
Yeah.
in this case, they just basically put them on timeout. They just took them away from the task and didn't have them do anything for a little while whenever they touch their nose to the target. So they've added another condition. They've added negative punishment. What they saw that's kind of key to this entire study is that the horses immediately picked up on the stop. And so what my initial worry is that I was thinking there's no way that you can prove that the horses just didn't understand the task when you first introduced the stoplight. 'Cause I was thinking, like, okay, what if they were just confused? And so they just kept touching it. But what these scientists are proposing is that if they were confused and didn't understand it, that you would have seen a gradual understanding when they introduced negative punishment. But in this case, they immediately caught on, which made the scientists think that these horses they had learned what was expected of them during that second session, but they had basically made a cost-reward analysis in their head.
Yeah.
They had thought, okay, well, I don't really miss out on anything if I get it wrong. So
I'm just gonna keep getting it wrong on purpose.
Exactly. It's like, well,
Yeah.
and actually this makes kind of sense with the ways that we know positive reinforcement works, because we have found that once you've established a behavior and an animal understands it, it's actually more reinforcing if you occasionally don't provide them with the reward. So they've done this like with pigeons. They had the pigeons pressing something. Whenever they press this button, food comes out, and so they get to eat the food. And it's why they believe, like psychologists believe, that slot machines are so effective on us is because we get a reward and then we don't get a reward for a little while. And it almost makes it more like enticing because we're like, oh, but next time I might get this reward. And so this is something that we kind of have known about a little bit, but what the scientists are saying is that it really points towards the fact that horses, they're not just purely reacting in the moment. They are able to think ahead. They are able to make like cost reward analysis and think like, okay, if I do this, I might get a treat. I might not. In this case, it's worth it. Then once they added, that punishment, then the horses were like, okay, well, now I might as well not touch the thing. I might as well not touch the target when the light is on because I don't want to have to like go and not be part of the study and just have to sit in the corner, like which I also think is kind of cute. It's like, and also not to get like too, I don't know, controversial in like training theory. But I see all the time where people are like, you have to make your horse work. Like horses don't like work. They don't, it's so much effort for them. And
like one of those things where it's like, oh, if you want to keep the people who say, oh, if you want to keep doing that, then, if you want to keep like running around, then okay, then I'll put you on a lunge line and make you run around sort of thing.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. When it's like, I think actually a lot of the times horses really do seem to like learning. They like to use their minds, I think. And this, I think, showcases that. Even if it is that they just like to get the food, it's like they want to participate. Mm-hmm. They want to be doing things. It's actually, in this sense, a punishment to take them away from this interesting task that they're doing. And so the things I do have as far as like some criticism of the study is that there is a very small sample size. It was 20 subjects, which is really small. But the thing is, that's kind of the norm with behavioral studies. It's really difficult to get a whole bunch of subjects, especially with like large animals like horses. It's hard to get enough subjects, and also it's hard to get funding. So it kind of makes sense to me that it would be a small amount of subjects. But the gripe I have with the Guardian article was that it made it seem like they kind of extrapolated and said, oh, horses can think and plan ahead, or they can like choose to not do a task. Oh, then horses must actually be able to like basically, all those things people often say about the horse being like
naughty.
Yes, naughty on purpose.
Devious,
yes. Or like choosing like not to do stuff because they are like they hate you.
Yeah. Being intentionally malicious.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, okay, this is going down a slippery slope. I don't really like this. Like they basically made it seem like, oh, the horses knew what they were doing the entire time and they chose to only cooperate in the end. And I'm like, I don't necessarily think that's what was happening. It's just, yes, I don't think that they are necessarily malicious. Like today, when Ace was being kind of a butthead, I had to remind myself, like, okay, there's a reason why he's acting this way. It could be something as simple as, like, he just really would rather go eat grass right now, and this is not an interesting enough task for him. Or he could be, like, sore. He could be in a little bit of pain. I can't rule that out, so I'm not going to, like, try and push him super, super hard. We'll just try to end on, like, a high note and end early.
I think it's really important to remember as well that, like, when it comes down to it, like, back to like the intentionally malicious thing, I think a lot of people want to believe that their horse is being intentionally malicious a lot of the time because it sort of gives an excuse as to why they're not doing what you want them to do.
Yeah.
Especially for like people at shows and stuff, when you're trying to put on a really good face and say, look at how well my horse is trained, and they just don't want to play along, and it gets
Yeah.
frustrating.
Yeah.
And they end up taking their frustration out on that. Or I think it's, and like you said, I think it's really important to remember that there's a reason that they don't want to do something. There's a reason that that they either pull away or seem disinterested, and it could be for a number of reasons, but it could also just be because they just sometimes don't feel like it, just the same way that we don't. And I think it's a really, I joined a very polarizing Facebook group a while ago called Nonviolent Equestrians. And I think that some of the info that goes into that group is really fair and valid. I think a lot of people go about it the wrong way, like getting people's attention the wrong way. But I think one of the biggest things that I sort of took away from that is that when you start a training session, and this is something that I picked up from Emma Massingale as well, who's an incredible Liberty trainer, and has such a wonderful little team of horses and Connemara's. But she, really hones in on the fact that the horse has to be a willing participant. Like, when you go to work, you get money, and you get paid, and you get something for doing it. The horse, when people criticize people who do positive reinforcement, or criticize treating the horse every single time they do something, well, it's like, well, you get paid something whenever you do something that someone wants you to do. Like, you will get usually you will get something out of it. Or when someone is working with you, like, why is the horse not allowed to also get something out of it as well? They should be rewarded for their work. It's exactly the same sort of thing. Otherwise, it's just going to be miserable all the time, and you're going to create an animal that is miserable about work and has a really bad ethic, because they know that when that sort of stuff starts, they know it's going to be unpleasant. And I think it's really important to remember that if you have a willing participant, you will most likely get to the answers easier, because they are willing and wanting to find the answers for you.
Yeah, exactly. If you were at a show and you let's say you have hypothetically you have a daughter and she's about to
I need to go talk to my wife. This is I think she's going to be a little shocked.
Hypothetically, you have a daughter. She's about to go out to show her horse, like in the dressage ring. Like she is next. What kind of news would have you leave that show?
The first thing that pops into my head is something medically inclined. The second thing is something either sinister or nasty going on behind the doors of the show.
Okay.
Yeah, that's definitely where my initial thoughts go to, but I'm sure you're about to school me with something completely different.
No, actually, you're pretty close with the medically inclined thing.
Oh, nice. There you go.
So, Mary Cox was at the British Dressage Under 25 Championships with her daughter Lauren. Her daughter Lauren was competing and was about to go out into the dressage ring when they got the call from the hospital that Marie had some kidney matches at the hospital.
Wow.
Yeah.
Canceling your horse show for a kidney transplant. Now that is very high on the list of reasons you would leave a horse show.
Yes.
Can you imagine they just like, can I just do my test real quick? I'll be right there.
Okay. So literally they went, hey, we're at a horse show. And the hospital said, no problem. Just finish up and then head over.
That's incredible.
And so,
That's so
they were
cool.
Yeah, and they were actually closer to the hospital at the show than they would be at home. So what they ended up doing is they drove straight to the hospital from the show after her daughter showed with the horse in the trailer.
It's that meme all over again that's like, parents are away, like dog in the house, and it's just like, my parents are away, horse in the hospital, let's go.
Yes. So yeah, the horse was there in the trailer. They had to like find parking in the hospital parking lot, which I can't imagine considering I just had to park at a hospital pretty recently and I couldn't find any parking. But yeah, I just thought that was a cute story. And also her daughter ended up doing the test really well, and she posted a score that qualified her for the championship final the next day.
Yeah. Well done.
Yeah, so it was like literally she received the news that her mother had kidneys waiting for her. She went and did her test and actually did really well, and then they drove to the hospital.
That's incredible. Imagine the mother would have been like, daughter did well in her test, got a kidney, like ticking all the boxes today.
I know.
Having a great time. That's so awesome.
Yep. And 5 days later, Marie was sent home to continue her recovery. But I thought that was a fun little story.
It's a great note to end on, just saying.
Yeah, it just reminds me of back when I had llamas and we'd have them in our trailer and we'd have to stop for lunch at places or whatever. Like we'd pick up lunch or breakfast or whatever when we'd be heading out to go on like trips.
Mm.
And people just loved the llamas, like, because they'll usually sit down when they feel movement. So they would sit down in the trailer, and then the moment we would park, those llamas would stand up and they'd poke their little heads out. And I loved just seeing people like walking past and then like doing double takes, and then people would come over and be like, "Are the llamas? Can I take a picture?" And I was like, "Sure."
Oh,
yeah, but I think having a big horse trailer, that would be a lot more intimidating to try and find parking somewhere.
Oh, 100%. And you'd probably piss a lot of people off too, because you'd have to park in a few different spaces and probably take up a bit of room.
Yeah.
I can only imagine that people would be very upset about that. It kind of reminds me of when we used to go to in Australia, there's a set of, we call them field days. It's kind of like what I assume like a big farm festival would be like in the States.
Mm-hmm.
But my grandparents used to show their South African white Dorpers. To be fair, we started showing boar goats, and over the years when they moved away from boar goats, they went on to white Dorpers. But yeah, same sort of thing, except when we transported, we would usually take 2 stud rams and 3 really nice stud ewes, especially if they had lambs on their sides too, because it was a great way of just showing them off at all stages of life. But yeah, we would take them in this trailer that was like, it was just a little like square cage trailer on the back, and the cage would basically go on top of the trailer and just create like a pen. Yeah, exactly. And we shove them all in there. I remember being like a tiny, really like uninformed kid and being, looking at my nan and being like, but like, what happens if the ram does his thing, like while they're in the trailer? And she was like, if he manages to do that in the moving trailer, I will be very impressed. And I was like, oh, okay. And then like, as we started using the bigger trailers and taking more sheep, they started putting in dividers and stuff. And it was but as a kid, I was just enthralled. I loved it. I remember when they had the boar goats, we used to have these little like press pins made up that said, "Ask me about boar goats."
Nice.
I think my sister still has one somewhere around. And we're like 7 or 8 at the time. So it was like, having this little pin on their chest, like a 7-year-old, and being like, having all these older people or, like older farmers coming up and being like, "Oh, what can you tell me about boar goats?" And us, being tiny children just yapping on about like
the most really
basic things. Yeah, it was adorable. They were the best of days. It was always so cold, but I remember always feeling like such a rock star whenever I went in to feed or like, fill up water or toss hay in their pens and stuff, and like having all the other kids watch me go in and do it. And I was like, yeah, it's so cool.
Yeah, you're like, I know how to do this. These are my show goats.
Thank you for listening to History from Horseback. We hope that you enjoyed this episode, and if you like what you heard, please consider leaving a rating or a review, or consider following us on Facebook and Instagram. As a new and upcoming podcast, we really rely on your feedback to grow and improve. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you out on the trail.